and it is the Saturday Coffee Klatch, usually with Heather Lofthouse and yours truly, Robert Reich. Today it is just me, and I am going to introduce to you somebody who is the producer and director and technical behind-the-scenes person who makes this happen every week. Heather is a little bit behind. Well, she's under the weather today. Let's put it that way. She couldn't join us. And Michael Lahanis, and do you pronounce your last name Calderon? Calderon?
Calderon.
Michael? Calderon. Calderon. You know, I just can't get the Spanish accent. But
Okay,
Michael,
we'll
thank you. Calderon. Calderon. Michael, thank you so much for filling in for Heather today. And Heather, if you're watching, thank you for everything you're doing. And I just wish you could be with us today. But thank you for, taking care of yourself. So, Michael, what are we going to be doing today? I mean, everybody's very concerned about, obviously, the polls. Maybe the way to begin. You are a polling expert, at least among us. Why don't you give us the latest poll?
Well, certainly an anxious poll follower. So I will do that as you suggest. Thank you. So just generally speaking, Harris is slightly ahead in the polling averages. We're talking 2 to 3 points among most of the major pollsters. And in individual states, depending on who you're looking at, as high as 5 to 7 points in places like Nevada, and neck and neck in places like Georgia. But broadly, we're close. We're within the margin of error for a lot of these polls.
I was just going to ask you that because the margin of error is about 2 to 3 points for most of these polls, and we're looking at the polls in the so-called swing states. Mm-hmm. That is basically Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Georgia, North Carolina, and Arizona, maybe Nevada. Those are the polls that count because those are the swing states that count. And the swing states count, we all know this, because the Electoral College. So even though you have, and it's probably likely that Kamala Harris is going to have a big popular vote lead over Donald Trump. Still, that makes no difference if the Electoral College lead evaporates. So these 2 to 3 points are very, very critical.
Yes, very true. And those, 6 to 8 states in particular, we certainly wish it was more. And as a former Ohioan myself, it's sad to not see a place like Ohio on that list any longer, given how much the race is tilted there.
Oh, Ohio. Oh, my, how I miss Ohio. Michael, where are you from in Ohio?
I'm from near Dayton. So certainly nothing in the news about that area recently that you've heard, I'm sure. But that actually gives us a good segue because a lot of these, how could this possibly be a neck and neck race?
How could it possibly? That's actually, to me, the biggest question because we've had a debate where Trump really was just incoherent. Kamala Harris just pummeled him. Just absolutely skewered him. And then you've had Trump for weeks has been going on with crazy stuff about Jews being responsible if he loses the election.
And actually, I can give you the exact quote on that. It's kind of remarkable. He said, quote, "If I don't win this election, and the Jewish people would really have a lot to do with that if that happens, because if 60% of the people voting are voting for the enemy, Israel will cease to exist." And he went on and on and on. And it's just, between that and, his running mate, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, talking about, these horrible things about the people in Springfield.
Well, that's what I was just going to get.
Yeah,
they're doubling down. They're not. They're
tripling
not just saying,
down.
No, not saying. I don't think that he's going to go to Springfield for a rally. I think that Springfield has made very clear they don't want him to come. But the idea of just doubling down on a fiction about Haitians in Springfield eating people's pets and. It goes on and on. This loony Laura Loomer coming with him to every place, and Mark Robinson not distancing himself from the lieutenant governor of North Carolina, and being as incoherent as he is. The speeches are just losing even a thread, even a morsel of coherence. Well, how can that How can
Yeah, I
he
mean,
be running?
are the polls wrong then? I mean, is it really this close? I mean, how can it be?
Well, look, there are several theories here. One is that the polls are just wrong. But if the polls are wrong, you have to at least come up with a theory about why they have not been wrong all along. That is, why is it that polls are showing that Trump is regaining a little bit of ground that he had lost before? Why is he doing better than he did before? I think there is a bias in the polling. We've talked about this a little bit before, but the bias is in the other direction. A lot of people don't want to tell pollsters that they are in favor of Donald Trump because they think of pollsters as professionals. And they are, if they don't have a college degree, they're a little bit reluctant to make that admission. So I don't think polling is the issue. I mean, another theory that many people have come up with, and they tell me all the time, is that it must be that the media are trying to create this kind of tight horse race because it sells ads. They want people to be very excited going into the election. They don't want people to know that it's basically Kamala Harris's election. But the data we have on that actually shows people, if anything, they are tuning out the news. They're not actually becoming more enthralled by the news. They're becoming so overwhelmed, and this is true especially of the swing states, so overwhelmed by all of the political ads and everything else that they're hearing, they're not listening anymore.
Oh, and it's huge sums of money being poured into those ads. I mean, as a former swing state resident myself, I can tell you, I mean, the airwaves are totally plastered, and at a certain point, you kind of have to tune it out to stay sane in your day to day. But oh, go on, please.
No. I was going to say that if people are tuning it out, or if they are tuning out politics in general, you have this very well. Let's put it this way: it's an asymmetry in terms of knowledge about the candidates, because everybody knows Donald Trump. All of the surveys show that he is better known than anybody else in the United States. But people still don't know Harris. It was only recently that she became a presidential candidate. So there is a kind of devil you know quality to Trump's support. And I'm not talking about Trumpers. I'm talking about a lot of people who may be wavering or may not like Trump, but they say, at least I know him. I don't know Harris. And I know how bad he is. I don't like him. I didn't like him when he was president, but he was president already. She's never been president. I'm going to take the devil I know. That is, unfortunately, I believe, operating right now.
And that's despite, I mean, the almost universally negative messaging that we're seeing from the Trump campaign, which is kind of remarkable. But I mean, I guess, yes, it is the devil you know. But I mean, to Harris's credit, her campaign has been trying to spin, shall we say, a more positive vibe. I mean, we saw that over the summer with the embracing of the Charlie XCX brat summer theme. And, her team is made up of a lot of young people trying to reach those young people in new and creative ways. I know you're not on TikTok as much as I am, but I have to give
you are Gen Z. You are
the oldest of the Gen Zs. Yes.
Listen, you're still the youngest person who is probably involved in our efforts here. But Michael, there is actually a very important point you said about her positive vibes. A lot of research by cognitive sciences. And I've known this for years, but I've just before this program, I reviewed some of it. A lot of research shows that negative messages actually are more powerful than positive messages. And cognitive scientists say this may be because, even in our brains, for 1 million years, we have, as human beings, been conditioned to respond to fear. More than we are conditioned to respond to nice messages. That survival has depended, in terms of survival of the fittest, depended on the fear factors. So that when Trump loads the airwaves with fearful messages about Kamala Harris, they may have more power than Kamala Harris's positive vibes. What do you think?
I mean, I certainly hope you're wrong. I mean, anecdotally, I can tell you, at least for a brief moment, young people were certainly enamored with Kamala Harris in a way that she was not ever. That was not a brand she ever had before. But whether that can be sustained, I mean, Brat Summer is over. I don't know if you're in the know on that, Bob, but it's.
But I'm on the know of nothing. But Michael, Michael, tell me. I mean, young people, are they still enamored with Kamala Harris? I mean, what are you sensing?
Well, I mean, I think that it depends, right? I think that obviously there's a lot of concern about what she is going to carry over and continue from the Biden administration in terms of foreign policy, in terms of economic policy and worker power. I mean, there was an interesting example this week where Chappell Rowan, this very popular young Gen Z pop star, sort of had a couple of statements come out where she was she was not really enthusiastic or excited about the prospect of voting for Harris to the degree that she didn't, give an official endorsement like a lot of other celebrities are.
She was not going to vote for Trump.
Right, and she made very clear that that was not the case. But I think she's a good example of how a lot of young people are feeling. There are things that young people disagree with that have happened in the Biden-Harris administration, and for better or worse, right? Harris is on the second half of that hyphenated administration name. So yeah, I mean, it's up to Harris to really continue to define herself.
Michael, don't they understand that Trump would be worse? That is, if you're making a choice here. I mean, by not making a choice, you're making a choice. By not voting for Harris, you are essentially voting for Trump. Don't they understand this? Your friends,
I think
your
they
generation.
do. I think they do. And I think that, again, on the foreign policy in particular, there's just, us young people, you were one once, you can be very passionate about particular issues.
I don't remember.
Well, you can be very passionate about very particular issues, and, you feel a sense of responsibility. And whether, obviously, I would say as a young person, in this election, Harris certainly is the choice that would do, at the very least, the least damage as compared with someone like Dem.
But I mean, he's a madman. He's an absolute madman. This is not just a Republican versus Democratic election. Now, look, I am devastated by what is going on in Gaza, what has gone on in Gaza. I think the Biden administration, let's call it the Biden-Harris administration, should have been and can be much harder with Netanyahu and not give him offensive weapons. I mean, I've been saying this all along, and I'm passionate about it. But does this give me any doubts about voting for Harris? No, absolutely not. I mean, why would anybody think for a moment about voting for Trump?
Well, and I think that, the solution to this is progressives and Democrats in the Harris campaign need to do a better job of communicating what we already know about Trump. As you said, right? He would certainly be worse on this issue by a country mile. I mean, my goodness. And on so many other issues. I mean, we can pivoting slightly, to the economic side of things.
The economy. I mean,
know.
They both came out with their economic plans this past week, and Trump was just. I mean, he wants to raise tariffs on 20%, 50% of all of the goods coming into the United States, which will create what? Price increases for everybody. It's like tax on everybody. A tax. It's both an attack and a tax. And what does that mean? That means more inflation.
Yeah, and more tax cuts for the rich, talking about targeting undocumented people. I mean, besides even the horrible things he was saying about deporting legal immigrants to this country in Springfield, right? I mean, across the board, it's a recipe for an inflationary disaster where if you're concerned about prices at the pump or prices at the grocery store, certainly the Trump economic plan will not benefit you unless you perhaps own a grocery store company.
So back to the theme that we were talking about. Why is this not getting through to people? Why are there still so many people who are willing to say, well, I'm going to go with Trump? If it's, why are they voting against their own self-interest? What's the matter with Kansas? Do you remember that book?
I have heard of it. Yeah, I mean, you could say what's the Midwest in general, right? I mean,
what's the matter with Ohio? I mean, why are people voting or willing to vote against their economic self-interest? I really don't quite know, except that for so many years, we've talked about this a little bit on this program. For so many years, so many people have been so devastated by the economy. As an Ohioan, you know this. Trade and big corporations outsourcing and fighting unions, busting unions, and basically getting rid of the industrial Midwest and much of the rest of the inland part of the economy. A lot of people have suffered because of that.
And if I might cut in, I can add, I mean, you want to talk about people not taking a look around them or not having the media, pointed out as much. When I go back to Ohio, what I see is an economy that is recovering thanks to a lot of the efforts of the Biden-Harris administration, particularly the IRA, the CHIPS Act. There are new, factories going up and data centers and all of these things, which is thrilling.
It's thrilling. And okay, Ohio, why aren't you coming around? Why aren't you seeing this?
And why aren't all of the Republican politicians who voted against those bills, why are they taking credit for them? I mean, I can look around at any of those congresspeople in Ohio or other states in the Midwest. Look at this amazing new highway, this foundry. Well, you had an opportunity to be part of that, didn't you?
Well, this comes back to a very delicate question, and that is misogyny and racism. In other words, how much of the X factor here, the unknown factor where we can't explain why Trump continues to have polls that are running neck and neck with Harris, how much of it do you think is due to just plain old racism and misogyny? A black woman running for president, a lot of particularly young white men who, without college degrees, whose economic prospects are basically nil, they are saying we can't bear this, or they are subconsciously saying we need to know more about her because we don't want to vote for somebody like that.
I mean, certainly, if you just look at the messaging of the Trump and Vance campaign in the last couple of weeks, it's clear they're going to the lowest common denominator on race in general. And it's a shame. I mean, you will talk to us, and in previous podcasts, you've talked with Heather about an era before this when the Republican Party was not like this. It's kind of an astonishing low that they've reached. And certainly
the Republican Party is dead.
Yes.
I mean, it is absolutely dead, Michael. You don't remember when there really was a legitimate Republican Party. I do. I remember. My father was a Republican. My grandfather was a Republican. They voted for Dwight Eisenhower in 1952 and 1956. The Republican Party was respectable. It cared about the country. It put the country above party. Well, that's just simply gone. It was going when Newt Gingrich began this before your time, but I think, and Pat Buchanan, I mean, a bunch of scoundrels, and obviously Richard Nixon before that. But Trump just nailed the coffin shut.
And I'm sure, I mean, your favorite Republicans, I'm sure, are among the first you met, like Abraham Lincoln, right?
That's right. That's right. Now, Michael, don't play the age card, okay? I go back many years.
Certainly. I mean, hey, but in all seriousness, that is a long fall from the era of Reconstruction and the party that advocated for civil rights in that first Reconstruction era.
Listen, they even Everett Dirksen. You don't remember Everett Dirksen. Do you remember Everett Dirksen?
Can't say I do.
Okay, an Illinois Republican senator. He championed Lyndon Johnson's 1964 Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act after that. The Republicans were not they were not delighted about civil rights, obviously, because by then the South was already becoming, it was Democrat, but it was starting to move in a Republican direction because of civil rights. But nevertheless, you have a history that is a proud history. Liz Cheney, I hope Liz Cheney and Mitt Romney and a few others, take the ashes of the Trump Republican Party and build a new Republican Party on those ashes. We need two parties in America. We need to have a choice.
And certainly two parties that have respect for rule of law and democracy, which I can't say that I believe the current incarnation of this MAGA Republican Party does. But, I mean, pivoting slightly...
Of course it doesn't. What do you mean you can't say? Come on, Michael, we're not being...
This is my Midwestern politeness coming through.
Okay.
There's something implicit there. But I mean, going back to the economy for a second, I mean, if we're talking about the leadership of the Republican Party, who at this point is, Donald Trump, it's remarkable to me, and as I'm sure it's remarkable to you, that a failed businessman is somehow more trusted to run the economy than, well, I mean, part of someone who's been part of the Biden-Harris administration with more experience. I mean, we're talking a guy who started, have you heard of these? Trump steaks. I've never bought a Trump steak. Trump mortgages. He started, right before the big crash in 2008. Trump vodka, Tour de Trump. That didn't work out too well. The Trump football. I mean, you can go on and on.
Hey, how about casinos? I mean, try to lose money running a casino. I don't think it's possible. The casino always wins. The house always wins.
It's remarkable.
But he bankrupted a lot of those casinos. But the big news is, I mean, the big reality historically is that his father bequeathed him something in the order of $250 million. And if Trump
must be nice.
If Trump had simply taken the money that he inherited and put it into an index fund and did nothing else with it, just shut the door, just said goodbye, he would have more money today on the basis of that index fund that he actually does have. So he's lost money. I mean, he's a businessman who has spent his life losing money.
And losing other people's money and scamming them out of their money. I mean, Trump University, right. Hello, as you like to say, hello.
That's an important point. That's an important point. Because one of the ways the only reason he has succeeded at all in terms of now having some money is because he's scammed and he has
stiffing his workers and
stiffing workers.
My
exactly.
goodness.
And America.
America.
That's what happened during his 4 years. People don't remember. There's a kind of collective amnesia about how bad we lost. Almost 3 million jobs during those Trump years. Even before the pandemic, things were not nearly as good as they have been since the Biden-Harris administration.
And I mean, it's remarkable to see a candidate for a major party. I don't know if you saw this week, hawking $100,000 watches, among other things. I mean, trading cards with his face. He's ridiculous.
Only good at one thing, and that is being a con man. He's not good at being a businessman. He is good and has perfected the art of being a con man. But we don't want a con man as president of the United States.
Certainly not. Well, that brings us to, but will we, I'm going to knock on wood for this because I don't want this to happen, but will we? I mean, is this ultimately going to come down to the fact that this is an anti-establishment moment and Harris, to some, represents the establishment? I mean, do we think that Trump and Vance and the cultural populism cards that they've been playing are going to outweigh, anything that the Dems can throw at them?
Well, this is actually, I believe, Michael, this is at the heart of the issue. We are in an anti-establishment era. It is not just Midwesterners. It's not just young men. It's almost everybody distrusts the major institutions of our society. Partly it's because of inequality. Partly it's because you have so much money having gone to the top and continuing to be siphoned off to the top, that a lot of people say, well, the system stinks. It is rigged. It's rigged against me. And that anti-establishment sentiment pervades America, and it pervades American politics. And the biggest danger that Kamala Harris and the Democrats face, frankly, is that Republicans have embraced this cultural populism, but Democrats have not embraced economic populism.
And how would you define economic populism for our audience today?
Well, I would simply say the truth, that you've got the power and the money at the top, and they are not interested in you. And until we change the allocation of power and money in this country so that the middle class and the working class and a lot of the poor have power and money again, and I say again, not in a MAGA sense, because nobody wants to go back to the 1950s, but at least in the sense that what the potential of this country has been, And the direction we used to be going in was the direction of more and more opportunity and wider sharing of the gains from the economy. And I think that that's what the Democrats ought to be talking about. They ought to be skewering, not every corporation, but the big corporations that are abusing their power. They ought to be skewering, some of the wealthiest people in this country, like Elon Musk, who every day is abusing his power and wealth. That is economic populism 101. And I'm afraid the Democrats are themselves afraid to use it because they're so dependent on money from the same wealthy, powerful people.
And we've seen this to some degree with Harris's ties to the crypto community, which, granted, I'm very excited to see the Harris campaign, has carried on like a good chunk of Biden's economic policies. We're talking, the billionaire minimum tax, and albeit to a lesser degree, raising the capital gains, all these things. But are you worried about Kamala's connection, or rather just being, somebody from the Bay Area, right? These are people she's interacted with. Do you think that she's gonna, in her term as president, this is what I would be excited to see, say, we're gonna continue on this sort of economic populist path that Biden has set us on, with worker power at the forefront?
Well, I hope she does. But I'm going to be frank with you, Michael, just between us. Nobody else is listening. I am going to do everything I can to make sure that Donald Trump stays as far away from the White House as possible. Kamala Harris is wonderful. She's a great candidate. I think that I'm going to give her a lot of slack over the next few weeks in terms of what she says about what she will do or not do. I just want her to win.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of our audience is there with you, especially because, putting aside the economics for a moment and thinking long term, this is actually fresh on my mind because our team has been working on a video on this. The Supreme Court and the federal courts at stake in this election, as so many people know, are, potentially several seats on the Supreme Court. We've got, not to play the age card again here, Bob. I apologize.
Listen, if I were on the Supreme Court right now, I might think about getting off to give Biden and Harris, the opportunity to replace me with somebody who's much
someone
younger.
A little bit fresher. But I mean, we're talking,
a Gen Z. I'd put a Gen Z on the court. Maybe 5 of them if I were president.
I mean, that certainly would be the right strategy if you want longevity. But Thomas is 76, Alito is 74, Chief Justice Roberts is 69. And
the geezer court. It's a geezer court.
Naturally. But I mean, concerningly, this is how you play the game, right? The justices that Trump appointed are all in their 50s. You've got Gorsuch at 57. You've got Kavanaugh at 59. Amy Coney Barrett at 52. And, the liberals are not getting any younger. So the next president, I have to imagine, is going to play a huge role in shaping policy for the next several decades, even beyond their 4 years, right?
Absolutely. She could. Or let's hope he could. And you're absolutely right. Trump, if he gets in again, he could really have appointed a majority of the Supreme Court. And that means not just the next 5 years or 6 years or 8 years. That means a generation or 2 generations. That means you guys, Michael, your people. You ought to be out there on the streets making sure that Trump doesn't get in. It would cast a pall over the entire country and the world for generations to come. I remember I was John Roberts, by the way, is partly responsible. This is not just Trump's court. John Roberts has been steering this court in Trump's direction. John Roberts wrote that presidential immunity decision. And I have been watching John Roberts for years.
And in fact, I think we have a clip of one of the first times you spoke about Justice Roberts. Would you care to see it?
I would love to see it.
Senator, what's come out so far is this man is obviously a nice fellow. People like him. He's a very, very bright, if not brilliant, jurist and an extremely thoughtful lawyer. But he has certain ideological predispositions. He has values. Those values are way to the right of the mainstream in America. I don't think there's any question about it. And so it is up to all of you to decide whether you want to put somebody in as Chief Justice who's that far to the right. I think it's as simple and direct as that.
It was simple and direct as that. I mean, it was.
And that's remarkable. I mean, let's talk about that for a second. This
That was
in-
I remember that this is the Judiciary Committee.
Yes.
The Senate Judiciary Committee. And I was asked to testify, and I told them I was not mincing words. I was not being political. I told them that, John Roberts is to the right of it. I didn't say Attila the Hun, but I practically said it. And I said, it's up to you. Do you want to put somebody on the court who is that far right?
And this was 2 decades ago that he was too far right. So the fact that he's seen as one of the more moderating, quote unquote, forces on the court now is, I mean, you were there 20 years ago. It must be astonishing at the very least.
Oh, Michael, it's astonishing, but it's not astonishing. If you're in this game long enough, you can see the currents. You can see how the tides are taking things. I mean, I knew John Roberts was going to be a lousy Supreme Court justice and Chief Justice. He was going to be Chief Justice. I didn't foresee the immunity decision that he authored, but it was in keeping with his past.
Certainly. And I mean, as a young person, even seeing that and knowing about John Roberts from before and looking at the composition of the court now, I would certainly encourage other young people to think about the Supreme Court as one of the major factors. I mean, in particular, we think about all of the abortion, the abortion discourse that's been happening and the fact that you've got abortion on the ballots in so many states this year. It is crucial to get out and vote, if not just because of the presidency, right? But if you're in a state that has one of those ballot issues on the ballot, I mean, you could at least make an impact in the short term there, in addition to that long-term policy impact by voting for president and senate.
From your words, from your lips to God's ears, Michael Lahanas Calderon. How did I do that? Calderon.
You're getting there. You're getting there. Maybe I'll guest host again, and we'll try again.
Okay. Listen, Michael, thank you. And we miss Heather terribly.
Yes, we do.
But Heather, hope you get better very, very fast. And Michael, thank you for helping us. And to all of you out there, with how many days did you say we have left?
Oh, 37, roughly.
37 days. Anyway, just keep the faith, keep working, keep managing this country in ways that we will get a good and dedicated Kamala Harris administration. Bye.
Take care.